And we are recording. Hello. Today is Friday, May the 21st. And hopefully we're going to finish this unit today. I'm not sure, but let's try, shall we? Yes. All right, Roman numeral 28. Perhaps the biggest story of the latter half of the 20th century has been the collapse of communism and the subsequent breakup of the Soviet Union. Probably one of the greatest catalysts for these occurrences was the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev. Brezhnev had died in 1982. He was replaced by Yuri Andropov, who died in 1984, who was replaced by Konstantin Chernenko, who died in 1985. Gorbachev came to power in 1985, and he let it known immediately that things were going to be different in the Soviet Union. Now, let's get one thing straight. Many people think that Gorbachev wanted to do away with communism, do away with the Soviet Union. He didn't. He wanted to reform the system. But what happened was, it's like once you open those gates, it's very difficult to close them. And that's exactly what happened. The gates just opened wide open, and all these changes came upon more changes, and suddenly the Soviet Union was no more. So, the Soviet Union in 1980 was, test question, stronger than it ever had been militarily, economically, though that was different, as it says there. Stronger than it ever been, but economically and culturally, it was a third world. I mean, this is very important. In the 1980s, the Soviet Union had more weapons. It was like, and there were many categories that the Soviet Union actually had more weapons than the United States did. And a conventional war between the United States and the Soviet Union would have tipped in the favor of the Soviet Union. But it wouldn't have been a conventional war, it would have been a nuclear war. And as you all know, there's no winner of a nuclear war. So that's a moot question. However, economically, the Soviet Union was a third world nation. You'd go to bakeries looking for bread, and there'd be none. Grocery shelves would be empty of meat, basic, foodstuffs, and forget about buying things like clothing or things of that nature. It was a third world country. And so, like that car I pointed out to you, there were shortages in all consumer goods, absenteeism in work. And see, that was the thing. In the Soviet Union, everybody had a job, and everybody got a salary. Problem was, there was nothing to spend your salary on. Many people stuffed their mattresses with rubles. That's the currency of the Soviet Union. And, they was like, why should I go to work? If I get fired from this job, I'll just get another one. And also alcoholism. Soviet Union was one of the few countries in the world that had a higher rate of alcoholism than the United States of America. Vodka. Yes. When President Reagan of the United States challenged the Soviet Union to keep up with U.S. military spending by introducing Star Wars, it simply couldn't. In other words, Reagan said, we're going to have a race, Soviet Union. We're going to see who can produce the most weapons. And the problem was the economy of the Soviet Union could not produce the money needed to keep pumping out these military machines. And so Gorbachev came. And he said he sought to reform the old Soviet Union and make it work inside the system. He did not want to get rid of it. But like I said, he opened a crack in the dam, and pretty soon the dam broke. Two words: economic perestroika and glasnost. Perestroika was the idea of turning the economy in the direction of free market, of allowing profit, which had not been allowed before. Glasnost, the other word, it means openness, a free exchange of ideas, debate, even criticism of the government, which had never been allowed before. And then political perestroika, open and freely contested elections, allowing different parties to participate with the Soviet Union. So, Andrei Sakharov was elected to the Chamber of Deputies, and in this format, Gorbachev was elected as the new president of the Soviet Union. 1989 was a year of revolution and reform in Eastern Europe. Lech Walesa finally had been released from prison 2 years early, and Solidarity, their labor union, was emerging from the shadows. Solidarity, in Polish, Solidarność. Polish leader Wojciech Jaruzelski made some concessions with the consent of the Soviet Union to the workers. Free elections were held in 1989 in Poland, and the communists lost overwhelmingly across the board. Communist governments were falling all across Europe, and except for Romania, where the former leader and his wife were shot, all of the transitions from communism to non-communism had been peaceful. It should be noted that the Soviet Union refused to intervene militarily in these affairs, perhaps so that I hate that. Perhaps so that they would not be lionized like the Chinese had been after the Tiananmen Square riots. Yeah. There were pro-democracy riots in Tiananmen Square in front of the Forbidden City in Beijing. And the communist government's response to those was running tanks over people. Yeah. No tanks. Anyway, get it? Tanks. That's just funny. Hungary then opened its elections and also its border with Austria. Let's look at a map, shall we? Here. Okay. All right. See, look. Now, at the time, this was East Germany. And here is Hungary. Hungary, at the time, was a communist country. And East Germans could legally vacation in Hungary. And Hungary opened its border with Austria. And so what many East Germans, and they did this by the thousand, was that they went to Hungary on vacation, simply crossed the border into Austria, and once they were in Austria, headed to Vienna to the West German embassy and asked for political asylum so they could go into West Germany. And they did that by the thousands. Yeah. So, in East Germany, Prime Minister Erich Honecker was informed by Gorbachev that the Soviet Union would no longer support East German communism with either money or soldiers. The old leaders of the DDR, East German government, resigned. New officers they elected resigned after a few more weeks. On November the 11th, 1989, just a few short months after Horthy visited the Berlin Wall, it came down. Coincidence? I think not. Chancellor Helmut Kohl of West Germany proposed a tentative plan for German reunification. In Czechoslovakia, the old hardline Communist Party faced the same demonstrations other nations were facing. They too began to resign, communists did, and were replaced by younger communists who then resigned. This was called the Velvet Revolution and resulted in the ascension to power of one Václav Havel, a former playwright. In Romania, that was the country where there was violence because the ruler of that country, a guy named Nicolae Ceausescu, was a brutal Joseph Stalin type guy, and he made too many enemies. And it says there, fighting erupted over human rights of ethnic Hungarians living in Romania. Civilians were fired upon, and opposition grew until there was fighting amongst the army and Ceausescu's own security force. In the end, both Ceausescu and his wife were shot. Simply, the Soviet Union could no longer militarily or economically support its sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, and cracks were beginning to form in the Soviet Union, which, the Soviet Union was an empire as well. In early 1990, Gorbachev finally proposed to the General Committee of the Communist Party that they should abandon its monopoly on politics and allow other ideas inside the Russian political scene. In other words, let other parties participate. Gorbachev was not abandoning communism, nor was he giving up on socialism. Gorbachev found himself opposed by three groups. First, conservatives, who thought he was doing too much, making too many changes. Then he was criticized by liberals who said, you're not doing enough changes. And also, there were many regions of the old Soviet bloc nation who wanted independence. Oh, I'm going to have to. Give me a break. I'm going to go back and pause. Pause. Yeah. All right, let's go back and look. Let's begin with this map, what I was talking about. We're talking about what East Germans were doing. See, this is East Germany. This is Hungary. Hungary opened its borders with Austria. And East Germans, because they could legally go on vacations to Hungary, would go through the border into Austria, and in Austria, they would go straight to the West German embassy and ask for political asylum, which they would get, and therefore they could go here into West Germany, and they were out of East Germany. And they did that by the thousands. Now, the other map here, yeah, look once again, all this in the dark red was the Soviet Union. And there were lots of these republics here in the Soviet Union who wanted independence, especially the ones with names on them: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, uh, Moldova, Georgia, and there were some others farther to the east, which here. But notice 1989, the year Horton went to Europe. Yes. Coincidence? No. All right, so in 1991, a coup began amongst the more conservative factions of the Gorbachev government. Once again, a coup is an attempt to take over the government. Gorbachev himself was put under house arrest. Boris Yeltsin climbed on top of a tank in front of Parliament in Moscow to denounce the coup and ask all persons to continue the Russian march toward democracy. The Communist Party, because of its involvement in the coup, collapsed in the Soviet Union. In December 25th, the date, December 25th, 1991. And he said, well, it's Christmas Day. Well, not in the Soviet Union. You see, the Soviet Union and or Russia, they are Eastern Orthodox Christians. And their Christmas Day actually comes on what we call New Year's Day, a week later. I'm going to sneeze. So the Soviet Union collapsed, and this thing called the Commonwealth of Independent States came to be. As president of the largest new independent state, Boris Yeltsin enjoyed a year of popularity and then began to face serious political opposition from former communists still in the national parliament. In 1993, Yeltsin suspended parliament, who reacted by deposing him. The military backed Yeltsin, and he ordered the military to attack parliament. All major nations, including the United States, supported Yeltsin. Why? Because he supported the United States. In December 1993, Russians voted a new parliament and a new constitution, which limited the parliament and gave the president stronger powers. This new government was far more dependent upon the military. Radical nationalists made a large showing in the elections, which could and did spell trouble for the future of Russia. Yeltsin saddled with problems in economics, nationalism, and self-determination and unrest, and Yeltsin was in ill health. He had a heart problem. Lived out his term before handing it over to this guy, Vladimir Putin. Yeah, him. This is when he came to power. Former head of the KGB, which, yeah. All right, so the United States, under George H. Bush, the first one, not George W., not the one who was president when you were alive, but the one who was president in the early 90s, tried to maintain a friendly relationship with the new regimes in the Russian Republic. He also tried to maintain NATO, when many people were saying, why do we need NATO? There's no more communism. Well, that's not true. He launched Operation Desert Storm, and then under President Bill Clinton, NATO seems to be headed towards the inclusion of former Warsaw Pact members. The CIS is a loose confederation of 11 of the former 15 Soviet republics that once made up the Soviet Union. Following areas are to be watched. Big one, nationalism. All those republics I just showed you want independence from the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, or whatever is governing them now. And the mistreatment of ethnic Russians in those aforementioned republics, which could give the Russian army an excuse to invade those new countries. The economy of the new capitalist Russia still lags far behind the West. Certain conservative elements of the old Soviet Union, like the KGB, still remain and operate independently. The political situation is unstable. I mean, it's very difficult to transition from communism to non-communism, overnight. The difficulty of assimilating the old communist politicians, who are still the only ones who have experience in government and are the only ones left, into a democratic style government. All right, so, and another thing, street crime in Russia, that became a thing. Street crime became a thing in Russia. Poverty became a thing in Russia. Unemployment became a thing in the new Russia. Homelessness, none of those things had existed. I won't say that street crime hadn't existed, but when the new government, with the opening up of everything, also meant that you could lose your job, also meant you could lose your house, also meant you could lose your income. And so, yeah, homelessness, poverty, an elevation of street crime really jacked up. In fact, you can ask Mr. Doozy why his brother came home from Russia. Answer, he got tired of being mugged every week. I mean, seriously. Roman numeral 2033, probably the most significant story of the latter part of the 1990s has been the breakup of and instability of the former communist state of Yugoslavia. Map, please. Here. This area here, the former Yugoslavia. Okay. So, Yugoslavia was created in 1918 as an afterthought of Treaty of Versailles. After World War II, 1945-1980, Yugoslavia was ruled as a communist state under the rule of Joseph Broz Tito, who, he was a hard guy, and he ruled Yugoslavia with an iron hand. When Tito died in 1980, communism died with him, and stability broke down and culminated in a civil war. Yugoslavia was created after World War I and contains 6 major ethnic groups who basically all hate each other. They've hated each other for over 1,000 years. Tito, at least, would keep that hatred from boiling over. Then you remove Tito, hatred comes back. Yugoslavia has 6 ethnic groups. Croat Slovenes are Roman Catholic. Serb Montenegrins and Macedonians are Eastern Orthodox. And then Bosnians are Muslims. It's oil and water. Tito had, by force, succeeded in keeping these ethnic hatreds in check until his death in 1980. In 1990, Slovenia and Croatia declared independence, and many Western nations recognized them, including the United States. Fighting broke out primarily between the Serbs, led by Slobodan Milosevic, a latter-day Adolf Hitler wannabe, and many other ethnic minorities in the Balkans. The UN attempted to intervene and failed. The EU, the Economic Union, the European Union, seemed helpless as they would not commit armed forces to quell the insurgency. Only when NATO, led by the United States, threatened to deliver airstrikes did the Serbs begin to consider peace. Yeah. Owen Wilson, that is a reference to a famous movie of the 1990s, maybe 2000s. It's a pretty good movie, actually. It's called Behind Enemy Lines. You should watch it sometime. Since communism had collapsed in Eastern Europe, opportunities and problems abound. The newly freed Warsaw Pact countries organize their economies successfully. There will be a new market to sell and buy from the West, and some of them have, some of them haven't. The standard of living in those countries should increase. I've talked about how much I like Poland. That's a perfect example. It's not on par with the West yet, but yeah, Poland, I go there and I visit there, and it's a nice country. Problems persist: unemployment, outdated factories, pollution. The old Soviet-style factories had no green controls, no anti-pollution devices, no regulations. They would pump toxic waste right out into the rivers. But also organized crime. A lot of the new criminal elements in the United States now come from Eastern Europe, from these regions. Racism rears its ugly head. Mass migrations caused by the promise of a better life in the West. Western Europe, particularly Germany, has had to pay the economic bill for these problems. Low economic growth caused by the absorption of so many economic problems from the former Soviet communist bloc. All these countries that we're talking about becoming capitalists, well, being capitalist means you have the opportunity to make money. It also means there's a chance you won't make money, a big chance. Civil war in Yugoslavia. We have a large number of students and people and families in the Florence area who are from the former Yugoslavia. We have students in this school right now who are Bosnian Muslim. We have students in this school right now who are the descendants of Serbs. And here in the United States, in Florence, they get along fine. Back in Yugoslavia, it's not a good thing. Um, can democratic governments survive in Eastern Europe, which has had little history of self-rule? That's a loaded question. Here's what has happened. These communist governments have changed over to that first liberal democratic governments, and they ran into problems. And what you've seen since then is that these governments, including Poland, their governments have become more and more right-wing, more authoritarian. Yeah. At least, though, Marxist socialism has been discredited, at least in Europe. In other words, the idea of violent revolutions to establish Marxist communism. Oh, and look, it's the end. I'm so sad. It's the end of the unit, the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. And we stop. Test Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday.